Chapter 4. Hey man, are you all right? Paul opened his eyes and looked around, then immediately sat up. He was on the banks of a river. Dry brown leaves surrounded him. Someone had just spoken, in English. Did I just wake up from a dream? He wondered. He looked down at his clothing and saw that wasn't the case. He turned to address whomever had spoken. A young man wearing baggy jeans and a flannel shirt was looking down at him. You're human? Paul asked. As far as I know, he responded. Hey, do you need help? Like, medically? Should I call 911? He pulled out a small silver thing from his pocket and opened it like it was some kind of Star Trek communicator. Paul thought it odd, but then he looked over at the other bank of the river and saw buildings. Modern, human-made buildings. Wait, am I in Minneapolis? Paul nearly shouted, getting to his feet quickly. Yes, the guy answered. No way, Paul said, hugging the young man. Thanks for everything. Leaving the bewildered stranger, he found the stairs that led to the river road. Energy was coursing through him as he sprinted up the steps. He felt more awake and normal than he had in a while. The combination of sleep and being back home was having a profound effect. At the top, it was a short walk to Pioneer Hall. When he saw the brick colonial-style building, it felt like coming home, though he'd only lived there a few days. Paul was about to go in when he realized that his pants were back in Chinese. He had no keys, student ID, driver's license, or money. This presented a problem. Not sure what to do, he walked up to Washington Avenue, where he was met with a lot of stares. Understandable, thought Paul. I look ridiculous. Thing was, he thought everyone else was looking strange too. The fashion, the hairstyles, all seemed so different. Even the cars on the street were off, all appearing rounder, sleeker. Most of the businesses seemed the same, but the Plasma Alliance was now apparently office space. How long had he been gone? He stepped into a drugstore and picked up the Star Tribune newspaper. He read the date. He read it again. He grabbed another paper and checked its date. And another. He stared hard at the numbers, trying to make sense of them, like it was a code he couldn't decipher. October 7, 2005. 20 years. He had been gone for 20 years. Paul stood there for a long while before putting the paper down and walking out of the store in a daze. Zombie-like, he trudged down Washington Avenue, found a bus bench, and sat as a future world moved around him. How did this happen? He had expected maybe 2-3 years gone, but 20? It seems he had escaped one impossible place where he didn't belong, only to land in another. If only Ellie had come with me, he thought, I wouldn't feel so alone and freaked out right now. Ellie, Eltherea. I left her when she was in danger. How could I do that? Coward, idiot, asshole. I have to get back to her. Then he remembered about the island and the loon. Ellie had said she existed in Tulath and other place at the same time. I need to find where that island is. I also need some way to get there. He also hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. I think I need some help, Paul realized. There was only one other person he had known here. His only hope was that he still lived in Minneapolis. He went back to the drugstore and asked if they had a white pages that he could use, and the guy behind the counter sent someone back to the back room for one. Thankfully, Paul remembered Richard's last name, and it was even more fortunate that it wasn't a common one. There it was, one listing for Silvestri, R. He's still in the city. Paul assumed the store staff must have felt sorry for him, as they also let him use their phone. He dialed, and after 3 rings, a voice answered, and Paul said, Richard, it's me, Paul Osterling. No response. Hello? Richard? I don't know what the fuck you're playing at, but if you have any info, you can call the official tip line if it's still up and running, Richard's voice answered. No, it's me, Richard, Paul said, suddenly understanding how crazy this must be for him as well. I remember the last time I saw you, which was only 3 days ago, Paul realized. I was in our dorm room, listening to records with Ellie, and you came in drunk and passed out on your bed. Actually, I saw you again later that night, but you were still asleep. Wait, how do you... I didn't even tell the cops I was drunk. Paul? Holy fuck, is that really you? Where are you calling from? Paul told him, and Richard said, Okay, I'm coming there. Where can I meet you? They arranged to meet at the small park near the dorms. Paul anxiously paced around the park, and in about a half hour, a car drove up, screeching to a stop in a no-parking zone. The driver got out, and Paul stood watching his approach, realizing as much as he was studying him, the reverse was also true. The two stood facing one another for a minute. He wasn't as round now. His cheeks were more shallow. His hair was buzzed short and was thinning on top, but it was Richard. Richard looked back at him, his mouth agape as he studied his face. Then he grabbed Paul in a bear hug, repeating, It is you! It really is you! You're alive! I don't fucking believe it! When he finally pulled away, he held Paul at arm's length as he squinted at him, saying, But you look exactly the same. You haven't aged a day. What, were you cryogenically frozen? Did you time travel here from 1985? He paused, taking in his outfit. After stopping at the Renfest? Something like that, Paul answered. Look, I want to tell you everything, but I'm starving, and I left my wallet in... Well, I lost it. Do you got anything to eat? Yeah, of course. Hey, come back with me to my apartment. You can get yourself cleaned up there, too. No offense. I mean, you look great. It's surreal how great you look, but you smell like shit. Paul had to agree, plus a shower would feel amazing. They got into Richard's car. They rolled down the windows, despite the cool fall temperatures, and left campus. I got a little place in the warehouse district downtown, he said. I was just downtown a few days ago. There was this art gallery on Hennepin, amongst all the adult bookstores. Paul thought of Ellie, guiding him down the sidewalk by his hand. What? That's all gone now. They tore down Block E in 1988, just razed it to the ground. Yep, tore down Paradise, put up a parking lot. Now it's a mall, though. Guess you've been out of the city for a while. Huh, was all Paul could think to say. That was just 3 years later. He couldn't imagine all that's happened since he fell into Tuloth. But he was more curious about what happened directly after his disappearance, so he asked Richard, who did his best to recount that time. After Paul didn't return to the dorm for a day, Richard had told the RA, who then contacted his parents. Paul's heart sunk when he thought of what his poor parents had been through. He couldn't handle contemplating that, so he brought his attention back to Richard. An APB was put out, then a missing persons report was filed. Since you disappeared the same time Ellie did, people wondered if you guys ran off together, Richard said. But when that stuff came to light about her, they started to consider her more of a suspect than your friend. What did they find out about Ellie? Paul asked, expecting it wasn't about her being an elf. Oh, just that she didn't exist? There was no record of anyone with that name having come from Iceland. All her info she provided to work here was fraudulent. She wasn't even enrolled at the U. Did you know that? It made sense to Paul, but he didn't know what to say, so he didn't respond. Anyway, Richard continued, then there was the weird thing at the Witch's Hat Tower. People had seen someone fitting her description hanging around there for weeks before, so they went in. The door wasn't even locked, just sort of grown over by ivy, which seemingly showed up overnight. It looked like someone had been living there. They dusted for prints, but the only ones they found were yours, and only on one item, a record album. Paul, were you hanging out up there with Ellie? Yes, I promised to tell you more, but please, continue. Richard gave a big sigh. Well, I put up a bunch of missing posters around campus. It felt like the least I could do. Not that you needed it. You were kind of a cause célèbre for a while. He looked over at Paul, saying, I know we weren't like the best of friends, but I felt bad, like I should have been protecting you from her. Like maybe I knew something was off about your girlfriend. I don't know. Maybe it's all hindsight. Wow, well, I appreciate that you felt protective of me. I mean, maybe you did sense something different about Ellie, something I didn't, but as far as us disappearing, she was just as much a victim as I was. And Richard, I love her. Again, it's hard to explain, which I will soon. She's a good person, though, and she's been through a lot. Going through a lot. he thought guiltily. Well, history is getting rewritten, I guess. Love. You're in love. That's great, he said, then fell silent for a moment. The radio had been on for the drive, but Paul hadn't been paying it much attention. During this pause in their conversation, a song started with a synthesizer sequence that made him think of The Who, except instead of a power chord or Roger Daltrey screaming, a drum machine came in. The lyrics were something about the freckles in our eyes, causing Paul to naturally picture Ellie's eyes. He then heard Richard sniffling and turned to see him wiping his eyes with his hand. Sorry, just feeling a little emotional. Beth loves this song. Also, you showing up. Oh, here we are. He pulled into a parking spot on the street, and they walked up to Richard's apartment. It was a small place with a lot of cardboard boxes and not much else. Still getting moved in, Richard said. You can use my towel. Sorry, I don't have any others. Paul didn't care. Taking a shower felt like the height of luxury. When he got out, Richard gave him some of his clothes. Calarians were too ripe, and there was no time to wash them there. Hopefully the elf won't be upset I left his clothes behind, Paul thought. But considering the situation there, it's a stupid thought. Of course Richard's clothes were a bad fit, but at least they didn't smell like death. The t-shirt he gave him had a smiley face with X's on the eyes and the word Nirvana on it. Paul asked what it meant. Nirvana? The band? How do you not know Nirvana? Richard said incredulously. Where have you been for the last 20 years? Paul shrugged and replied, I don't mean to be rude, but you said there was something to eat here? Oh, right. Richard dug through his fridge and pulled out some items. I hope a PB&J is okay, and I got some chips. That actually sounds great. Thanks. In a few minutes, Richard put down a paper towel in front of Paul, set the sandwich on one side, and poured some potato chips on the other. He handed Paul something he called Coke Zero, saying, New diet version, just released, which caused Paul to flash back to Ellie's excitement over the new replacements record. Damn it, brain. Paul looked for a distraction from the memory and saw a framed picture of Richard and a woman, both smiling happily. It was one of the few things not still in a box. Is that Beth? He asked. Richard sat down with his paper towel plate. Yes, she was my whole life. Then I fucked it up forever, and now all I have is that photo. Oh, sorry to hear. I don't know if you remember, but I was an asshole back when you met me, he continued. It was just a week ago. Of course I remember, thought Paul. Instead he said, well, you weren't entirely. No, come on. I was a misogynist, a homophobe, and it only got worse when you disappeared. I blamed Ellie for that, so I went a long while viewing all women as duplicitous bitches. I dropped out of school and basically became a functioning alcoholic, just a lonely, bitter bastard. Then something crazy happened. There was this woman at my job who was kind to me. I don't know why. Guess she was lonely too. Anyway, she taught me to be a better person, made me want to be better. We were together for 10 years. 10. Then I thought she was cheating. I ended up punching this guy who happened to be my boss. Here he paused, looking at Paul. What am I doing? I'm not the story here. Okay, so you've got some food. Now where the fuck have you been? After Paul scarfed down his meal, which tasted fantastic in the way all food is great when one is starving, he told Richard nearly everything, from that last night he left him passed out in the dorm room and the kiss that somehow landed him in an alternate world, to his waking back up in Minneapolis. He left out much of what the storyteller had related, just conveying that Ellie's ex was a bad dude, and she was in a dangerous situation. Richard looked at him blankly for a time, then shook his head, saying, If someone else had told me that, I would ask them to seek professional help. But you, looking how you do, well, it just ain't natural. So I suppose an unnatural reason actually makes the most sense. He paused before going on. You've really been gone from this world for 20 years? Jesus, you've missed so much here. The Berlin Wall, the internet, Nirvana, 9/11, the Gulf War. Actually, 2 Gulf Wars. Look, it's not that I don't care what happened here. I'm sure Nirvana and 9/11 were awesome. Actually, 9/11 wasn't. You know what? Never mind. Then Richard added, Nevermind is a great album, by the way. The point is, Paul continued, I'm not sticking around. I need to get back to Tulath, back to Ellie. Maybe I wasn't meant to end up there, but I don't belong here either, not anymore. Okay, and how are you going to do that? I mean, if it involves having to kiss you at the top of the tower, I guess I'm willing to give it a try. Paul laughed. Thanks for the offer, really. No, my hope is to find the loon and get her to send me back. Do you know of anywhere on the Mississippi that has a falls with an island nearby? Of course, St. Anthony Falls and Nicollet Island are less than a mile from here. Can't believe you don't know about the falls. Hey, cut me some slack. I only lived in Minneapolis for a couple days, and most of that was spent on campus, Paul said defensively before continuing with his request. So I don't want to impose on you more, but I will drive you there, and I'll help you look for this loon person, Richard interrupted. But before we go, you should send a message to your parents and let them know you're alive and that you're okay. It would mean more coming from you rather than me just saying I saw you. Yeah, I should, said Paul, realizing that it made sense that Richard would have had contact with his parents after his disappearance. Great. This will be such a relief to them. I've actually kept up with them. We send each other emails. Your dad is pretty tech-savvy. I've got a new iMac in my bedroom, one of my few monetary indulgences. This model has an embedded camera. We can record a video. I'll upload it to YouTube and send them the link. Paul understood Elvish better than whatever was spilling from Richard's mouth, but he heard video and believed that would mean more to them than a letter. Richard had him sit at the desk as he sat down on a box next to him. In front of Paul was what looked like a flat TV screen with a keyboard, very different from the chunky personal computers he was familiar with. Your parents never stopped trying to find you, but they also did their best to move on. Oh, I forgot. You're an uncle. Your little brother got married. They have a kid. David, he's about 10 now. This information was too much to absorb. He imagined it was similar to awakening from a coma to find the world had moved on without you. He couldn't let himself get overwhelmed by that. He took a moment to consider his message, indicated he was ready, and Richard began recording as Paul looked into the camera, doing his best to ignore his own image being displayed on the screen. Hi, Mom and Dad, it's me, Paul. I'm with Richard at his place in Minneapolis. He's helping me record this. I want you to know that I'm okay. I also want you to know that I never meant to put you through any of this. It's hard to explain, but it was an accident that I disappeared. It wasn't anyone's fault. And I know this doesn't make any sense, I ended up in a different world. Hopefully the way I look will help you believe that. Maybe not. Just know that I'm sorry that I couldn't contact you sooner. I'm also sorry, but I have to leave again, and I won't be able to see you in person. I don't think I can come back. So this is also goodbye. If you knew why I had to leave again, I think you'd be proud of me, that you'd understand. Just know that I love you and miss you. Tell Jack I love him too. And congratulations to him. I hope this helps you. I promise I'm okay. Tearfully, he nodded at Richard, who reached over and pressed a key on the keyboard. Paul got up and went into the bathroom, shut the door, and broke down. After a few minutes, he splashed some water on his face, stared at his reflection, steeling himself for the next task. As they were about to leave, Paul remembered about the dried meat Calarian had given him to offer to the loon. It wasn't among his elven clothing, having fallen out at some point in his journey. Thankfully, Richard had some Slim Jims, and hoping that would be a good substitute, they left for Nicollet Island. We've been over every inch of this place. I just don't see how you're going to find her with no idea what she looks like, or where she might live, or really anything about her at all. I don't know, but I have to keep looking. You don't have to stay with me, Richard. Really, you've done so much already, Paul said as he looked about the little neighborhood they were walking through, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything that seemed unusual or unearthly. Oh, no, you don't. I've spent the last 20 years wondering what happened to you. Then you show up today with this insane story? I'm not letting you out of my sight. Paul patted Richard on the shoulder as they walked on. They had parked at the south end of the island and zigzagged their way north, trying to cover as much ground as they could. When they reached the other end, they headed back, walking down the opposite side before arriving back at the pavilion where they had parked. He saw no elf-like person. What did you expect? Paul asked himself. You didn't notice Ellie was one. What makes you think you'll be able to spot this elf among these humans? Paul and Richard stood at the shore and looked out at the upper dam of the falls before Richard said, Maybe she's on the little island down that way. There's another island? He turned to Richard, then heard a voice from behind. You have the smell of Tulath on you. Paul whipped around to see an ancient-looking person staring up at him. The hood of a black sweatshirt covered her head, and long gray curls spilled out from beneath, cascading to her waist. She looked at him with 2 dark eyes, as if they were all pupil. He did take a shower, Richard said. Paul held up his hand to silence him. You are the one they call the Loon? Aye, that is how I am known. And who might you be? My name is Paul. This is my friend Richard. I've come to ask for your help. I need to get back to Tulath. She studied him for a moment before responding. Well, this is a new thing. I have helped many an elf, and some errant humans cross to other place. Never have I been asked by one of your kind to travel to Tulath. So you'll do it then? Paul asked eagerly. Not every new thing is good. Not every new thing should be welcomed, she said. I was here when the first peoples of this world were the stewards of this island. It was sacred to them, so I stayed in Tulath and left them to their ways. Then the invaders, new to this land, came and defiled it, spreading what they called civilization by killing their fellow humans and poisoning land, river, and air. So I do not welcome the new for the sake of it. But come, tell me your story. I will determine your worthiness then. She led them to a picnic table, walking with a cane as she did so. Paul noticed the back of her hoodie had a graphic advertising the Loon Cafe. Actually, I think I would have spotted her, he thought. Sit, she said. Tell me of how you came to be in Tulath. Paul wasn't sure how much to say about what led to him being with Eltherea in the tower. Their time in Minneapolis didn't seem germane. He just said that when they kissed there, the transition occurred. Ah, the Witch's Hat Tower, a very powerful location. The landscape of Tulath and other places echo each other, as you must know. That tower, however, is the only place where humans built something to reflect a natural thing in Tulath, the rock known as Famhair's Thumb. It was almost as if they felt its absence in their world. That Eltherea was drawn to it is of little wonder. Do you feel love for the elf? She asked abruptly. Yes, I feel for her as I have never felt for anyone. And you wanted to be with her at all times, yes? The kiss you shared was a physical connection born from that desire. It bound you to her, and it was her wish to be both with you and back in her home that led to your crossing into Tulath. So tell me then, how did you return to this world? That I don't understand. We were coming to see you, but Eltherea was captured. To my shame, I continued on, hoping to make it to the island, but before I did, I just woke up in Minneapolis, except 20 years from when I left. Why is that? Ellie, Eltherea, was gone for a year, where only one day passed in Tulath. Time ebbs and flows here compared to in Tulath. Here in other place, some events are as rainstorms, swelling the river and causing rapids in the stream. As for your return, fear, like desire, is a powerful emotion. It is what pulls most of you humans back here, should you find yourselves in Tulath. Why now do you wish to return? Is it because your time has moved on? No, though it did help me see that the only place I belong now is with her. I guess it took leaving for me to realize that. It is true that I was afraid, but I'm not anymore, Paul continued more resolutely. That night in the tower, before we crossed over, I told her I wanted to always be there for her. I can't do that here. Please, will you help me get back to her? The loon looked out at the river, then back at Paul. You have brought your offering? Paul pulled out the package from his pocket. She took it, looked at it, and smiled. Ah, step into a Slim Jim, she said, and to his surprise winked at him. Come, we will go to the shore. Paul, Richard, and the loon stood on the rocky beach. The loon said, You may wish to say your goodbyes now. Richard, who had managed to stay silent for much of their conversation, just said, "This sucks. You just got back." Paul hugged him and told him, "I'm glad you were still here for me to find. Thank you for helping me, and hey, you're a good guy. You should be proud of the man you've become." They separated, and Richard smiled, his eyes brimming with tears. The loon turned to Paul and told him, "Get on your knees." Paul obeyed. "Remain there. Do not move." She then turned toward the river, took a step, and vanished. Paul looked on surprised, then looked at Richard, whose wide eyes just stared at the spot she had been, the color draining from his face. "What the?" was all he managed to say before the loon reappeared. She stepped onto the shore. The bottom of her long robe, for that is what it was now, was wet from the river. She looked taller, her figure more imposing. The black hood still covered her head, but the once plain covering currently had patterns of silver threading that caught the light, shimmering like the sunlight reflected on the river behind her. Even more remarkable was that she now carried a wooden spear in place of her cane, and at the end of it thrashed a large fish. As he stared at the squirming thing, it appeared to flicker in and out of tangibility, like a TV channel with poor reception. She placed it on the ground near him, and from beneath her robe retrieved a large knife. As she held the flickering fish in one hand, she raised the knife with the other, and when the fish appeared solid, she swiftly cut it in two. "Look up to the sky and open wide your mouth," the loon commanded in Elvish. Paul did so, and she lifted the two halves, squeezing their contents onto his face. He gagged as the blood and viscera ran down his throat. "Now stand," she said, and Paul, despite his shock and disgust, managed to get to his feet. The loon got behind him, drew a line on the ground with her spear, then returned to face him. "I break your bond to this world," she shouted, and pushed him down with the blunt end of her spear. Paul landed on his behind, stunned. He wiped off his face, spat out what he could, and looked up to see the loon was no longer there. Then he noticed the light, or lack of it. What illumination there was came from the moon just above the horizon. It was night. He got up and looked around, seeing rivers, trees, but nothing else. Then a green glow fluttered by his face. "Yes!" he shouted, unable to contain his excitement. "She did it! I'm back! Hell yes!" His celebration was interrupted by a thump. There, sitting on the ground, was Richard. "Ugh, I'm gonna puke. No. Yes. No. No. Phew. That was gross." He looked up finally and saw Paul. "Oh, hey. Richard? What the hell are you doing here?" Paul asked, bewildered. "Just a sec," Richard said, getting up and going to the river to wash off his face. After taking some handfuls of water to rinse his mouth, he returned to address Paul. "So this is Tulaf? This is nuts. It's nighttime?" he said, looking around, his eyes wide with amazement. "Yes, but why are you here? How did you even—" "Luckily, I had a candy bar in the car, and she was fine with that as payment. Not a bad deal, really. Travel to a whole other world for the price of a Snickers. The fish guts I could have done without." "But why? Why did you follow me here? You need to go back. We can wait here for her, then we can make her send you back to Minneapolis." "Now, hold on, Paul. I'm a grown man. This was my decision. Look, I had trouble believing your story. Even with your young face, it just seemed too crazy. But when I saw the loon disappear, and I realized everything you said was true, and then you disappeared." Richard stopped and took a big breath before continuing. "My life felt over in Minneapolis. It felt over in, what do they call it here? Other place. I had lost Beth. I had lost my job. And then, from nowhere, you show up. Do you know what my plan was tonight? I was going to break 10 years of sobriety with a bottle of vodka. But then I learned there's another world where magic is real. I mean, come on, Paul. Do you blame me for not wanting to see it for myself?" Paul considered this, and it made sense. When he came here, it was a shock to his system. How would he have felt if Ellie had told him the truth, had shown him her ears, her magic? Maybe he would have been more excited, less freaked out to end up here. Or maybe I'm just a coward, he thought. Then he told himself, "Shut up, I'm working on it." "So, hold on, the loon just agreed to send you here? She seemed to need convincing with me. What did you say to her? I don't know. Maybe she was feeling generous. I talked to her for a while when she returned. She's a fascinating person. Paul, she's an elf. I mean, I know Ellie is too, but we didn't know it then. The more she talked about Tuloth, the more this idea grew. I could start a new life in a new world. Then she asked about why I had come along, and I talked about how your disappearance had wrecked me. I spent so much of my life wondering what happened to you, Paul, you don't even know. I imagined you showing up one day, that we would become friends, that you would like me now that I wasn't that same asshole you met freshman year. Then you do. You show up and just disappear again. Paul was stunned by these revelations. It was apparent that the mystery of his fate had caused Richard pain. As for him being here now, if the loon felt Richard was worthy to enter this world, who was he to disagree? Okay, well, I can't look out for you. I can barely keep myself from getting hurt here. You know my intention. I need to find my way back to Chines and find some way to help rescue Ellie. The first thing is figuring out how to get off this island. What about that boat over there? Richard said, looking just past Paul. It had the look of a Viking longship, but was the size of a large canoe. 2 paddles sat on the bottom. On its bow was carved the head of a loon, its long beak pointing toward the other bank. Then they looked at the falls just downstream. These were not the concrete-enforced engineered ones of modern Minneapolis. These looked wild and turbulent. The other bank isn't far, Paul said uncertainly. Yeah, but the falls look closer. Aren't elves super strong compared to us? What choice do we have but to try? Let's move it further upshore. Hopefully, if we're more upstream, it won't be an issue. The two dragged the boat as far as they could and then pushed it into the water. Paul, having some experience steering a canoe, sat in back, while Richard took the front. They pushed off and began paddling furiously, Paul doing his best to point them to the other shore. It was futile, though, as the river's pull was stronger. They were being swept towards the falls. Paul gave up trying to steer them away and tried to keep them pointed at the oncoming drop, hoping this would lessen the chance of capsizing. Navigating rapids was beyond his meager canoeing experience, which consisted of paddling around a quiet lake on family vacations. They stayed upright for a few seconds before the boat succumbed to the thrashing waters. There was no warning, no time to take a deep breath before they were plunged into the cold, rolling river. Paul didn't know which direction was up, and having had water go down his windpipe, was desperate to break the surface. Just when the pain in his lungs was going to force him to breathe in, a hand grabbed his and pulled him up. Richard had one hand on the now upside-down boat, and with the other helped Paul find a hold. Paul coughed up water, along with other stuff, as Richard pounded his back. Wordlessly, they floated down the river, recuperating from their recent trauma. At some point, Paul couldn't guess how far they'd come. The river widened and the current weakened. Then, like children learning to swim, they held onto the boat like it was a floaty and kicked their legs until they reached the shore. There they collapsed. It was some time before either spoke. Thanks, man. I would have been a goner back there, Paul said, breaking the silence. Don't sweat it. I'm just glad I spotted you. Richard sat up, looking around. What's next? We ended up on the right side of the river, I think. There should be a road at the top of this gorge. From there, we walked to Chines. Paul added, It will take some time. We won't get there before daybreak. Then we better get a move on, Richard said, getting to his feet. He offered Paul a hand, and as he helped him up, said, This sounds crazy, especially considering what we just went through, but I'm having fun. Fun was not the word Paul would have chosen. Anxiety was what he was currently having. He was anxious to get back to Chines, and the prospect of the long walk there was dispiriting. What other option is there, Paul thought. Soaked to the skin, they climbed up the steep slope, using the few roots available to help pull themselves along. After a few stumbles, they at last reached the top, and there, waiting patiently, stood their deliverance. Sunset! Paul cried out. How is it you are here, though? He said, petting the horse's neck and feeling both elated and confused. Is this where I fell off her back? It's possible that wasn't long ago for her. Thank you for waiting for me, my friend. Hey, is this that horse you fell off of? Richard asked, approaching it warily. And were you just speaking Elvish? That was so cool. Paul hadn't even realized he had slipped into Elvish. Yeah, this is Sunset, or Liathulin in their language. Somehow we arrived right where I was when I found myself back in Minneapolis. That we did, and this incredible animal is still here. Richard, I believe the Six are helping us out. Great. What are the Six? Not sure. Gods, maybe? Here, give me a leg up, then I'll help you get on. Wait, we're riding back? She doesn't have a saddle or anything. How are we going to stay on? Well, I'll hold around her neck, and you hold on to me. It'll be fine. Richard shook his head, saying, I felt safer going down the falls. But he helped Paul up and managed to get himself on Sunset's back. He held tightly around Paul's waist. Paul said something to Sunset in Elvish, and the horse took off like a bolt of lightning. Oh, shit! Shouted Richard, but his exclamation was barely heard above the sounds of hooves thundering down the road to Chines.